especially considering the weather and all this fun stuff. But glad that you made it here safely. We just want to welcome you and glad that you decided to come and invest in you. I'm certain that you will meet someone new if you make an effort at all, because there's lots of people here. And we also want you to learn something new. And I'm excited to hear from Patrick because I'm sure we all will. We all struggle with burnout and want to figure out how not to struggle with burnout. As always, we want to thank Stillwater Hospice for hosting us in this beautiful facility, allowing us to come here. Terry's going to talk to us for a couple minutes, and then I'll come back up and intro. Thanks, Terry.
This doesn't work. Can you guys hear me? Does this work? Okay. I guess so. Hi. I'm Terry Sowers. I am the hospital liaison for Stillwater Hospice. So I was asked to talk a little bit about our hospice home. It's what we call down the hill from here. It was built in 2001. It's a 14-bed facility. We use it as a crisis center for patients who are on our hospice service. So what they have to, this is Medicare driven, all Medicare driven. Patient has to be in a crisis where they cannot be taken care of at a home setting, whether it's a nursing home or their own home. So pain, shortness of breath, nausea, vomiting. So we bring them over to our facility, temporary setting, and then send them back home with their loved ones. We just remodeled our facility to make it more home-like. It was home-like before, but now we have patio area so patients and their families can actually go out, feel the ground, smell the air outside rather than be in a hospital bed during the time that they're there. And it also gives a time for families just to be out there by themselves if they need to get away from their loved one and know that we're there for them for 24/7. There's also an area where families can bring food in and they can eat as a family, sit around a kitchen table, pray if they need to. There's a little area, a chapel, or just a reflection area, as I call it too. Water always seems to soothe everybody's soul, so there's little ponds around there too. And it's just a nice time to, again, reflect, talk about what's happening with their loved one. We're available to them anytime they need us. And if you have any questions, I'll be available for anybody. Thank you.
And we did not plan this, and you don't know this
Okay.
probably. My father actually passed away in that building down there. That's the bad news. The good news is it was amazing. We could not have had a better experience.
Yeah.
From the care to the treatment to the way they treated us as the family. I mean, they allowed us to make it our home while my dad was there. And people brought in food and we had meals together and stuff. The only thing is he couldn't go outside. And now they can also get outside.
So it was before?
It was before that. It was in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you haven't seen that facility, call somebody
Yes.
here and go see it. It's amazing.
It is beautiful.
Yes, thank you for everything that you do. Yeah. Last month, we were fortunate to have Wendy Cobb Johnson talk to us about the journey and some of her leadership skills, leadership lessons and such. Quickly, Andrea is going to come up and talk to us about an event, some stuff that they have coming out real quick, and then we'll get Patrick started.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Andrea. I am from The Journey, and I'm just here to tell you about an event we're going to have next week, Wednesday, January 8th at the Allen County Public Library in the theater. Randall told us that we needed to let you guys know what we need specifically, so I'm here to tell you, we need you to come to this event and learn about The Journey, okay? I have a lot of postcards over on the table. It'll tell you all about what we do. There's a QR code on the back that will take you to our website. If you're interested at all in learning more about The Journey, please come and talk to me or Wendy, and we would be glad to fill you in. We are going to have testimonials from our mentees and also from our mentors, just talking about how we have served the community and served our sweet mentees. Basically, we serve a community of youth that We give them a safe place. We do programming every month. A lot of people are like, what's the journey? And you have programming? So we're trying to get ourselves out to let you guys know what we do for our community. It's a great organization. I am so proud to be part of it. Wendy is here, she's the executive director, and we would love to talk to you more about it. But please, like Randall said, specifically what we need is people in seats. Please come next Wednesday, January 8th, 5:30 to 7 at the Allen County Public Library, and learn more about the journey. Bring your friends, your family, and maybe we can help a youth that you know in your community, your life, and they can come to the journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you for supporting us and being part of our Fridays as well. And now, finally, to our featured speaker. I'm proud to announce our speaker, Patrick Riecke. He's a nationally recognized speaker, burnout expert, and executive coach dedicated to transforming how leaders and organizations approach workplace well-being. He brings a unique perspective that combines firsthand knowledge of the pressures that we face with actionable strategies, which I'm looking forward to, for burnout prevention and recovery. After navigating his own journey through the burnout, he turned his focus into helping others do the same. Today, he delivers dynamic keynote presentations, day-long workshops, and provides executive coaching to empower leaders to create cultures of support and resilience. Please join me in welcoming Patrick.
Curious, how many of you have had a family member or loved one or friend use the facility down the hill here? Can't say enough good about that. Unmuted, but it doesn't sound. Oh, I turned it all the way off, and that's why it's not. How about now? Check. Are we on? Shows on, unmuted on mine. Check. I don't have a good enough voice, hopefully, for everybody to hear, but I know we're also trying to record, so. How about now? Anybody? Check. Of course, it worked great when nobody was in the room. How about now? No? Still not? Second, not working.
Check. It's because we turned the room volume down for the video.
I'm just playing an IT person today for.
You do a great job, Emily.
Alright, let's try this. Check. How's that? Better? Probably turn me down just a little bit because I'm sure I'll get more animated later. How about that? That's good. Is that good? Denise says it's good, so that means it's good. All right, so we're good to go. Well, thank you for bearing with us as we get that figured out, better figured out at the beginning than halfway through, I suppose. So we're in a good spot now. So I worked in, you'll hear a little bit of my story later, but I worked in chaplaincy at Parkview for many years, and ministry before that, and so supporting people at the end of their lives has been a big part of what my wife Kristen and I have done for many years, and the services downhill here are fantastic. And we were talking this morning, a couple of us, about how you don't know much about grief resources until you have a need for them. When you discover you have a need for them, I hope that you have someone like a Leslie Wyrick or Stillwater staff or somebody in your life that can point you to the resources that you need. And in our community, this facility and the facility down the hill are probably the top two resources that are available. So I hope that you're not in a place where you need that right now. When you find yourself in that place, for sure, this is where you want to be. So just a little bit about where we're going to go today. We're going to talk about some definitions of moral distress, definition of burnout. You're going to hear a little bit of my story, some studies and statistics, trends, where things are going with burnout overall. We're going to have a conversation together a little bit about what burnout looks like in your industries. We're going to talk about the organizational path, like how does a department, how does an organization, a team, a system, how do we reduce the impact of burnout? Because I think that's a huge deal. We've got a short time together, and so at the end I'm going to give you a QR code that's going to let you do a review of our time, and then I'm also going to send you some resources. So one of the things that I like to talk about the most, we're not going to get to talk about today because of our time, and that's how do you personally recover from burnout. So we're going to talk organizationally, as a leader or within systems, how do we curb burnout? We won't take the time today to turn the corner and talk about for you as an individual, if you're in a place of burnout, how do you recover? So I'm going to send you those resources afterwards. Before we dive too far into it, how many of you would say, I feel like in my industry, whatever your industry is, whether you're a solo entrepreneur or you're part of a large, multinational corporation, in my industry, I think burnout is an issue. Raise your hand if you would say that. Okay. So about half of you. And curious, you don't have to self-identify for this part if you don't want to, but how many of you would say burnout's been an issue for you at some point in your career? Some point in your career, okay, so over half. So half of the first one, I would say maybe about 60 to 70% for that one. And so I won't spend too much time trying to convince you today that we need to talk about burnout because most of you have experienced it, and my guess is those of you who haven't experienced it personally have been close to someone who has. So let's talk a little bit about definitions then. Moral distress is when you do something or you watch something happening, specifically at work, that runs contrary to your personal values. Our personal values come from a variety of places. Might come from our upbringing, might come from our faith, might come from our personality, our preferences. Maybe it comes from a place of, this is industry standard, best practices, that sort of thing. But when we go to work and we see those values compromised, violated, maybe we're watching it happen, maybe we're called into a situation where we're participating in violating our own values, that's moral distress. And it is actually pretty hard to avoid ever experiencing moral distress. It's, in some industries for sure, almost an automatic that you're going to experience some moral distress. The industries that come to mind first are education. In education, you have values and ways that you think you ought to be able to serve your students, and sometimes your hands, of course, are tied to be able to do those things. Certainly in my line of work in healthcare, we see moral distress almost immediately. As soon as a new nurse or doctor or someone else in a non-clinical setting, as soon as you start working in healthcare, you're going to experience some of that moral distress. When that moral distress is really sudden, just happens, boom, all of a sudden one day, instead of kind of gradually coming in, or it's really profound, that's when we start to talk about moral injury, where there's a sort of a soul level injury that we're experiencing. Later I'm going to ask this question, and you're going to hopefully respond to this question of what causes moral distress or burnout for you in your industry, either you personally or things that you've seen go on around you. So we're going to talk about moral distress, but there are a lot of causes of burnout. You can see some of those on the screen. I'll have a few more on the next screen. That's surprisingly difficult for me to say today. So of course, too much work, not having autonomy when we're at work, that sort of thing. Not being really clear about what my role is at work. Some of you have experienced that, like what am I actually supposed to be doing and why am I doing everybody else's job all of a sudden? And I was hired for this 2 years ago and now all of a sudden I'm doing something completely different or additional, and there's no sort of hope of reprieve of that changing. I'm sure some of you have experienced, your manager's left and we're not going to backfill her or him, and guess what, that means you're going to be doing all their responsibilities going forward, and so there's that role ambiguity. So let me pause for a minute. You've looked at these now, I haven't read through all of them, but for you, and we'll make this personal instead of industry, for you, if you had to pick one of these, what would you say has been something that's led to burnout for you? It's not a hypothetical question. It's actually, go ahead.
Work overload.
Work overload. Can you say a little bit more about what that looked like for you?
I'm a speech therapist and I have kids back to back that I see and I love them all and I love my job, but you know, just to be there and give quality therapy, it's hard sometimes when there's so many needs out
Yeah.
there.
And then you got the documenting in between and everything too. For sure. Yes. Please.
I would offer a lack of control. In my previous role, I worked in recruiting and staffing, and you know, you have candidates that say they want these 4 things and this amount of money, and you're like, great news, here you go, here's a job offer, these 4 things and a little more money, and they say, well, I kind of want to think about it, and then you look stupid to your client.
Yeah.
Or the client that says, I want this and this, and you find this and this. Well, but I also, so just lack of control because we deal with people, not widgets.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's right.
I would say lack of community.
Mm.
Everyone's unhappy.
Mm.
And no one knows why. But they're just unhappy because everyone has their own level of tolerance. But especially being in education, you talk to the majority of teachers right now, it's not good.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a combination, probably for me, work overload, which many people can deal with in certain circumstances, but really have one role and really, tends to really kind of identify that person.
Yeah, so if you can hear him on the side of the room, that work overload, then when you mix work overload with, I'm not exactly sure what my role is anymore, that can really stress us out for sure. Maybe one more before we go on.
The external stressors, like
Yeah.
literally the sandwich generation.
Mm.
So taking care of grandkids, taking care of parents.
Yeah, sandwich generation, if you're familiar with that term, you're taking care of parents, you're taking care of kids at the same time, and you're still working full time, most of the time, and in between folks too. Yeah, good. So let's talk about the traits of burnout, because what we do a lot is we talk about stress, we talk about burnout, we talk about overload, but there's really some actual definitions of what burnout is, characteristics of burnout that we can identify. So it's interesting because sometimes when I talk with clients or talk with individuals, I find that they don't think they're burned out, and then when we talk through the 3 characteristics, they realize they are in a place of burnout. But the opposite also happens. Sometimes people think, boy, I'm really burned out. But then when you look at the classical traits, they're not as burned out maybe as they had thought. They're just in a season of stress. So the first trait of burnout is emotional exhaustion. I noticed a few of you, after I said that phrase, did a slow blink, like, yes. Emotional exhaustion. The best way that I can describe emotional exhaustion is when you have some time away from work, which some of you've had, I assume, over the holidays. But when you go back to work, even after some time away, you don't have any energy for it when you go back. Meaning that some time off, actually was late last night. Our daughter, who's here, helping me with some video, drug me to the gym last night, which is good for me. I'm glad that she wanted to go, so that got me there. And as I was walking the treadmill, listening to a podcast, and the gentleman on the podcast was actually a TED Talk talking about work-life balance and burnout and some of the things that we're talking about today. He said sometimes when we take a week's vacation, it's like trying to shield ourselves from the sun with one of those little umbrellas that comes in your fruity drink, like what is that, cocktail umbrella, I guess, a cocktail umbrella. It's just not sufficient. The problem is more significant than that solution can resolve. And so if you've ever been in a season where you take a week off, you take a long weekend, maybe even you're off for medical leave for some time, and when you return to work, you have 0 energy, 0 interest in what you're doing. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of you after these holidays that you're going back to work saying, yes, I get to go back to my job after some time off. But if you don't have any energy for it whatsoever, that can be a possible sign of burnout. The second trait for burnout is depersonalization, when you don't feel like a person anymore. When you feel like you're just supposed to go through the motions like a machine, people aren't really seeing you, you're not really seeing them. The twin of depersonalization is cynicism. Now, I'm always worried that when I say cynicism, you hear sarcasm and you think, oh no, if I'm a sarcastic person, I might be burned out. It's possible, but that's not what cynicism is. In fact, when we're sarcastic, which I think we've all been a little bit already with ourselves today, we actually hope that people will see the truth behind the sarcasm. But when we're cynical, everything is negative. So every change at work, we say, oh, great, here we go again. There's something that might even seem to be positive, but it's met in us with negativity. We say there's no way this is going to turn out. So just one more thing, this could be another problem. And that cynical nature where everything is negative and bad all the time. That's another trait, burnout. And then last but not least, I think this is perhaps the saddest part of burnout, is when we just don't feel like we're making a difference at work anymore. So sometimes, of course, this could happen quickly with a new job, and you think you're getting into it for one reason and you're going to be able to make this difference, and then you find out once you get there that it's not quite what you thought it was. Or it can be a situation, if you're in my story, that for a long time you felt like you were making a wonderful difference, and then things have changed. Things have changed around you, things have changed in the world, and things have changed inside of you. And so you don't feel like you're able to make that difference any longer. So a little bit about my story. Some of you know, and I know some of you for years, I'm a Fort Wayne person. I worked for Parkview Health for 10.5 years. I had lots of great opportunities at Parkview, for which I was very thankful. I got to be in front of cameras and on stages and lead departments and sit at the table with the big wigs. I wasn't one of the big wigs, but I got to sit at the table with the big wigs a lot, which I appreciated and enjoyed. Got to do a lot of neat things in the community as well, and work with associated churches and other entities in the area to really do things that I felt like were making a difference. So leading up to 2020, for years, I'd led multiple departments, gone through a lot of change over the years. I've been on call. Anyone in a job right now that requires on call? Okay, we're going to stop and have a word of prayer for people that have to do a on call. You know what that feels like. I did that for 10.5 years, pretty much 365 days a year. For that time, obviously, healthcare system, in this area is a large healthcare system, and I lacked in boundaries during that time. And then we got to 2020 and 2021 and 2022 in the pandemic and what we experienced. So this first line you've probably already read. During the pandemic, the chaplaincy team, of which I was a leader for the entire time there at Parkview, just in those 2.5 years, what I would consider the 2.5 years of the pandemic from March 2020 until September of 2022, that team responded to 5,563 individual patient deaths. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting all those were COVID, but certainly COVID increased our numbers. We went from averaging much less than this to our numbers just skyrocketing. So you can imagine that I saw some of my coworkers that I cared about, that I loved, I watched them burn out during this time for sure. The work overload, role ambiguity was certainly a big thing for us. Our roles changed quite a bit, and I watched them go through these things. All the while not thinking it was happening to me, but being there and supportive for others and what they were experiencing. And by the fall of 2022, I definitely was in this place where I exhibited these characteristics. I was emotionally exhausted, I was cynical, I was angry. I would see people not abiding by some of the mandates, during that time, which was maddening to me as a person who is in the healthcare system and watching people die. And I'd see posts on social media that were uninformed. That's part of the reason I had to leave social media during that time. And worst of all for me, you saw some of the stuff that I got to do at Parkview to get to the point where I'd always felt like during my time there I was making such a huge difference, where I felt like we were just swimming upstream, trying to swim upstream, but we were just being pushed backwards by the current all the time. So this is my 44th birthday. This is us going to Casa Grande on DuPont Road on my 44th birthday, our favorite Mexican restaurant. We enjoy going there quite a lot. You can see that I've chosen to wear green pants here, which was a choice that was not necessarily popular with my more stylish children, but they stood in the picture with me anyway, so I appreciate that. And so this is my 44th birthday, but something was already happening inside of me when I woke up that morning, and I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what. So while this is my 44th birthday, this is also my 44th birthday just a few hours later. What I found out after months of testing and keeping an eye on my health was that I experienced what the doctor called vaguely mediated AFib. Vaguely mediated, does anybody know what the vagus nerve is? You've heard of the vagus nerve before, so you hear that embedded in there. So the vagus nerve is sort of in control of your fight or flight response, runs through your whole body. The word vagus means wandering because it's a nerve that goes through your whole body. So to sit in a consult room and have a doctor tell you the reason that your heart went out of rhythm was because of your stress was surprising for me. It shouldn't have been, but was surprising for me and certainly eye-opening. So that day, just my nervous system was overloaded. They came in and said, well, what we do for people in your situation is we administer shock, the cardio version. And so I took 225 joules of electricity to my chest, wide awake. I elected not to take sedation for that. Fortunately, my heart went back into rhythm at that point, but things were starting to show the wear and the tear and the effect. A few weeks later, I had another new diagnosis in my life, and that was one of depression and anxiety. I realized that to make it to 44 years old without a mental health diagnosis is actually kind of privileged and kind of fortunate. But I also know that for you, for me, for everybody, when we experience a new diagnosis, we have to pay attention, right? Whether that's mental health or physical health, we have to pay attention when these new things come up. And so for me, to come to a place of depression and anxiety was new, and so I needed to pay attention to that. Did I do that very well? Not at first, but I started to figure those things out. And I include this photo always when I talk about my battle with depression and anxiety, because I think we need to remember that this is actually what depressed people usually look like. They're doing the thing. This is actually what burned out people look like. They're still doing the thing. Keith and I talked this morning about how even when you're burned out, you typically continue to produce and do the job and keep the habits maybe that you've had in the past. And so maybe you picture someone who's in a dark room, not able to leave their home if they're depressed, but most of the time depressed people are going about their business. So just a reminder to check on your people and to have that conversation with them, even if they look as bright and shiny as I do in this photo. So this would be my summary. I think perhaps some of you have said similar things about your experience in life and your experience with work. It was something that I enjoyed for a long time, but was certainly taking a toll. I wish that my story was the only one that I'd ever heard where work stress and burnout took such a significant toll. Obviously, we saw the hands earlier, and I'm sure some of you could share stories about not only the stress that you had, but the physical manifestations of the stress that you experienced. So these are some of the stories from my coaching clients. Stroke has come up a number of times, Bell's palsy with one client. Dysphagia means you're not able to speak as you normally would. Irregular heart rhythm actually tends to be the most common physical manifestation of the stress, as I know now. One individual who had leg drop, another with a finger that had become paralyzed. And these are things that these people, they know. Now it's hard to go and get a diagnosis, although some of these people did actually get a diagnosis with the doctor saying, yes, this symptom is because of your stress, but we know when we know, right? We know that this manifestation physically is connected to my stress. So going more on the workplace culture side of things, these are other things I've heard from my coaching clients with not a lot of support from leadership sometime. Of course, this is something that can drive burnout. One individual who said, my leader literally told me I never think about you. Now in a room where we've got lots of leaders and people who care about leadership, and you've taken time on a snowy, cold January morning at the beginning of the year to sit down, I hope that it's unfathomable to you that these things would happen to people. But the on-call piece, I talked to a nurse leader, one of my clients who, I asked her, I said, how long have you been on call? And she thought for a long time, she said, for 25 years. Pretty much every day, all day for 25 years. Well, that depersonalization really becomes a problem at that point, right? Because how can you be a human being on call for that many years in a row? Another client of mine I gave this bottom response recently. I asked him as a question, I said, if you woke up every day and you had 100 units to spend it mentally, spend your thoughts on, how many of those units do you think you spend on work right now? And I thought he'd say a high number, but then when he said 95 of the 100, I was sad. I also can understand. That's something that we experience quite a lot. Because there's certain things that happen out here, right, that are stressful at work. My leader is not being supportive. We've got a lot of clients today. We've got a lot of documentation, a lot of stress, lack of community. The thoughts live inside our heads. We can't really escape those. And so when we're thinking so much about stress at work or just about work in general, this can drive burnout too. So just a couple of slides. This is a Gallup survey over a long period of time. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see the spikes here around 2020. These are the negative feelings. Now, I will rush to say there's no such thing as a negative emotion. This is their words of negative emotions: stress, worry, anger, and sadness. And you see, and this is in the context of work. So they're asking them as employees, how much of the day yesterday did you feel these feelings? And so you can see stress and worry especially jump quite a lot during the pandemic. What I want you to take from this is not just that during the pandemic things jumped, but that things have not yet returned to where they were before the pandemic. So if you have that sense of things were crazy for a while, they haven't quite settled back down all the way, Gallup sees the same thing and they support that finding. This is a similar survey from Gallup where they asked people to describe themselves as thriving, struggling, or suffering at work. You can see for years the gap was not huge but significant between the top line being people who would say that they were thriving at work, the second line being people who said they were struggling, and then way down here at the bottom, people who said they were suffering at work. The lines have met. So you see 50% now say they're thriving, 45% say they're struggling, and 4% saying that they're suffering. These lines, by all indications, are about to cross, not just meet. So what does that mean for us as leaders? That means that people that we lead, half, maybe more of them, are struggling, maybe even suffering. So if we want to be good humans, good leaders, even productive leaders, we have to pay attention to the fact that many of these people are struggling so badly. There's a reason why after I give a talk on this, sometimes there's a line of people who want to talk about it afterwards, because this is such a common experience, but we don't always give voice to it. We need people who are going to talk about this and help us to find ways forward. So even in the TED Talk I listened to last night, this gentleman shared that globally what he's seeing is about 48% of people saying that they're experiencing burnout right now. When I look at industry specific, most of the industries I've talked to are healthcare industries or education industries. Those are two of the most burned out industries, of course, as you might imagine. But when you look across from one industry to the next, that 50% mark is normal. To see 50% of people say they're experiencing symptoms of burnout. We know what the cost is intuitively. It's just hard to do a good job when you're burned out. Now, I will say a lot of the people, and we had this conversation even beforehand, a lot of people who are burned out, they got that way because they cared about the job. They loved what they did. They were invested, and so maybe over-invested and working harder even than they needed to. So those people are unlikely when they burn out to just stop doing all those things. So there's actually been some interesting studies, particularly in nursing homes, with nurses and nurses' aides, that a research study that was done by a colleague of mine recently, where she anticipated that she would discover that the nursing home facilities where there are more nurses who registered high on a burnout index, she anticipated there would be a lot more errors in patient care. And she actually did not find that because these nurses care deeply about what they're doing. And just because they're burned out doesn't mean they're going to stop doing those things. And this is what makes burnout in part so insidious, is because you might have somebody around you who's still doing all the things that they've ever done, doing really great work. You might tell yourself, I'm still producing at work, I'm still getting the job done, people are still happy with what I'm doing. Why do I feel so crappy? I almost said a bad word. Why do I feel so crappy inside if I'm still doing all these things? I must be okay. I can still get up and go to work every day. Some of you said that. I know you said that. But that's not actually the litmus test of whether or not we're doing okay on the inside. All right, so this is some of the conversation part. What do you think are some of the main contributors for burnout in your industry, in your field? That's still the opinion. You don't have to there's not a next slide that's going to reveal what the true stats are or anything like that. So in your opinion, tell us, what your line of work is and what you think really drives, either in your organization or sort of industry-wide. What do you think are the contributors to burnout or to moral distress?
I would say so I work in the financial industry, and I would say really for us, we're told that you are always a financial person, so there's not really a separation of,
Okay.
I'm a model when I'm here, I am, coach when I'm here, I'm always a financial person wherever I go. You live it, you breathe it, that's it, so there's not really that makes sense, there's not really a separation there, so you do carry that work with you wherever you go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know, I've never heard that before about the financial industry. So what do you think is the impact of that?
I think a lot of it is that you think of work 95% of the time.
Yeah.
And so you can't, when I'm at home, if I have some downtime, it's like, oh, I need to take vacation or I should make some phone calls or whatever. Or maybe I need to be out, social or something so I can meet someone. It's just a constant.
Hmm. Yeah. That does sound stressful. What else for your industry or your job or your place of employment, what do you think drives burnout? Okay, a couple of them back here.
I'm in banking and I'm not in a branch anymore, but I can see branches and I've managed branches for years and it's just changed so much. Whereas managers used to sit in their office and deal with loans and do accounts and complaints. I used to see the manager. Now they're running drawers. They're fighting to have enough employees to cover lunches, and they're still trying to do all that stuff. Plus, upper management wants them out getting more business, and there's just so much that's piled on branch managers from my perspective.
Some of that work overload and role ambiguity like we were talking about earlier. Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I'm no longer in manufacturing, hallelujah. But from my time in manufacturing, I would say the reward for good work is more work. And nothing ever gets taken off your plate. You just get to do more projects and more work. And inevitably that leads to burnout.
Yeah. The reward for work is more work. Does that happen in any other industries? Not in manufacturing, just manufacturing. Yeah, the reward for capacity. Hey, you did a good job, so let's have you do something more, expand your scope of responsibility. Without very often saying, now that we're expanding your scope to include these things, we're going to take those other old things off your plate. That's very rare to have a renegotiation. Okay. What else?
I work in the financial and banking industry as well. I feel like competition is a big driver of that, because if you don't give your time yourself time, you give the vendors you have to outwork you. So you want to find a outwork that you
Yeah. It's kind of a head trip, right? Like you're always thinking, it's kind of like a professional athlete always wondering if someone else is working harder than they are. So, yeah, so that lives in your head constantly. So does that make it harder? This is sort of rhetorical, but honestly, does that make it harder to rest? Yeah. Because you always feel like there's something more that can be done. Okay.
I think in some way, having to be the standard bearer in your office and for whatever that may be.
Yeah.
I think that and just having to navigate sometimes being the only in a certain space,
Yeah.
that can be weighty and you just get tired of doing it.
Yeah.
So you're ready to look at something else or figure something else out or try to find somebody else so you're not the only.
Yeah.
But that becomes a lot of a weight and you can't continue out to burn out a lot of it.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about being at home, because I think that's an important concept. Like,
Yeah, I mean, well, looking at me, I can only speak for me. Sometimes I'm the only black man in the room. Sometimes I'm the only black person in the room. Sometimes it is I'm the only person under a certain age in the room. I'm maybe the youngest in the room to have a conversation. Believe it or not, I am under 35. And I kind of but when you are in that space and you have influence or you're sought to be the authority on a certain conversation, and you're the youngest in the room, and everybody kind of knows that you don't have the experience that they have, age-wise maybe, or even industry-wise, but you're now the authority on that specific conversation.
Yeah.
That can be weighty as well, because now you have the pressure to succeed. You have the pressure of, if this person doesn't know what they're talking about, then how can we ever trust anybody else in that age group? You're trying to carry your age group, carry your race, carry your gender.
Yeah.
It's a lot to carry in one sense.
Yeah. That speak for.
Yeah.
Can you speak for
Mhm.
African Americans? Can you speak for the younger generation? Yeah. I can speak for myself as a member of that younger generation, but that's all I can do. It's not fair to. I grew up Catholic, and I used to hear people say, especially as I came into Protestant churches, Catholics believe that blah blah blah. I'm like, there's 2 billion Catholics, you know, so there's some variety there. So you know, and I would speak as like someone who understood Catholicism. There's a lot of variety. You can't say this is what all that group, but yeah, carrying that is really heavy. Good. So let's talk about paths to resilience, and I have so many thoughts on this. I've got to winnow it down a little bit. We're not going to talk about the personal path, but the QR code at the very end is going to give you some access to those resources. So let's talk about the organizational steps, some really necessary steps to help prevent burnout. First one is the opportunity to opt out. So we're going to do some polls here in a second. So if you do have your phone with you, go ahead and pull that out. We're going to have a QR code for the polls where we'll all interact a little bit with these questions. So the first poll is going to be over this step for organizations. The opportunity to opt out. This is something that's absent from our workplaces a lot of the time. The opportunity to say, I just can't today. I just can't in that scenario. That violates my values. I don't feel comfortable in that situation. So the poll question for that one, you'll see, this is not displaying the QR code. All right, so raising hands. Do you believe, let's go with yes. So raise your hand if yes. So the question is, do you believe you have the option to remove yourself from a morally distressing situation if you feel at work, you feel like it compromises your values or your well-being? Do you feel like yes, you feel like you are confident you can do that? Good. So probably a little over half for sure. Organizational step number 2. So the value there is being able to step back, right? To take a little bit of space between you and the stuff that's stressing you out. Hopefully some of you have had leaders who have been able to spot in you and identify that you're having a hard time, and they've pulled you out of something for a little while. Organizational step number 2, to take a timeout. So sometimes you can't opt out, even if you got a great leader who's super understanding, a great team who supports you, and they would give you the opportunity to opt out of a stressful situation. Sometimes that stressful situation is just here, right? And I think about education. You can't say, well, you know, you get to opt out of that kid, you know, having a fit in your classroom. You don't get to opt out. It just happens. But sometimes after that unavoidable situation has occurred, a leader could facilitate a timeout and say, let's take a minute to realize that was awful. That was really hard. That was something that probably was distressing for you. Not just stressful. Work can always be stressful. It's always work. But stress and distress are a couple different things. So taking that time out to say, let's recognize how difficult this really was. So the question here, we'll do raise hands again. Has your leader ever done this? Had a timeout after a difficult situation that couldn't be avoided? Yes, if you would say yes. Okay, just a few of you. Okay. So as leaders, this is something that you can consider. If you can see this really hit everybody. I think sometimes as leaders, we want to just move on as quickly as possible. That was awful. Everybody hated it. Everybody's mad. Let's just move on to the next thing. But that communicates to the group that the next time something comes up like that, they're not going to be well supported. So if you can take a time out afterwards and say, look, I just want to recognize this was really hard on the team. Yesterday was not what we wanted it to be. You know, obviously for us in healthcare, it was often after a bad patient outcome, or you know, a family that was really mad at you and yelling or whatever, to take a step back and say, this was difficult. I'm sorry that it happened to you. It's amazing how many times we actually don't need our leaders to fix it. We feel like we need them to fix it, or we would like for them to fix it, But I can't tell you how many times, there was no fixing for most of the stuff that my staff experienced at the hospital. They come back and they've just watched chest compressions on a 14-day-old baby who's now died, and they're watching this baby in their mother's arms. They come back to the office. There's nothing I could do to fix that for what they've just experienced. But I could sit and listen. We could acknowledge what they went through, recognize that this was difficult. It's amazing how many times they would stand up from that and thank me for having helped them when I really actually hadn't done anything other than just recognize the difficulty that they were going through. Step number 3, and this goes right to that point, leaders who listen. So it's not just nice to be a supportive leader, it is actually productive to be a listening and supportive leader. There's 2 primary mitigators of burnout, and this one tends to take precedence over the second. If you want to lower the burnout rates, teach your leaders to listen. I had a great leader when I started at Parkview, but she would, when we had staff meetings, she'd talk 90% of the time. And so it was really hard for anyone else to chime in. And when she took another opportunity and I moved into her role, that was one of the things I wanted to change. I wanted to talk maybe 40% of the time in the meeting as leader and then listen to them. This goes so significantly for your one-on-ones with your coworkers, to let them talk. Ask them questions and then let them talk. And then believe what they're telling you. Instead of trying to correct them or get it back into corporate speak or whatever, just listen to what they have to say. So the question there, would you describe your leader as an effective listener who genuinely considers input from their team? How many of you would say yes to that? That's good. Almost half of you. I said good, and then I kind of surveyed, so, well, maybe not great, but good. So there's 2 types of leaders that hire me to come in and do burnout workshops, burnout keynotes. Some of those leaders want me to come in and fix their broken people, because man, if they could just figure it out, stop being so burned out, and get on with it, start doing a better job, let's bring this guy in and talk about burnout, fix everybody, and we'll move on. We know that's not real. I'm not going to fix anybody in a 45-minute or 2-hour keynote or an all-day workshop, but they're trying to check that box. And then there's other leaders who are self-aware. They realize this is an ongoing conversation. This is not a one-time fix. And so bringing me in to have that conversation is a part of a broader conversation in their department. Organizational step number 4, non-punitive ways for people to say, I need help. If 50% of our coworkers are struggling or suffering, how do they say to their leader, I'm struggling or suffering? Without fear of retribution, fear of more limited opportunities, fear of stigma, being treated differently. I think this looks different in every different work environment. How do you say you're not okay? So the question here is, do you feel comfortable seeking help for your mental health at work without fear of stigma or negative consequences? We're gonna take a little breath. Oh, hold on. We're gonna take a little breath before we answer this one, okay? Okay, how many of you would say yes, I feel comfortable, I could see? Okay, maybe 35, 40% of us. So this is still a work area for a lot of our industries. How do we say that we're not doing okay? And then along with it, how do we report errors? How do we say this isn't going right? How do we get the voice of the front lines up to the leaders and then to the executives to non-punitive error reporting? So the question here, yes or no, are you confident that you could report an error or near miss in your department knowing it would be addressed properly without fear of retribution? How many of you would say yes to this one? Okay, good. Well, this half of the room says yes. Nobody over here says no way would ever be able to report an error. But you can see why this is important, because people want to do a good job, and when they don't feel like there's an opportunity to be able to say this is not going right with it being addressed, then that fuels burnout. Last step, and then we're going to have some Q&A. So the last step is that peer support. How many of you have stayed at a job because you liked working with the people you worked with? Wow, almost everybody. Yeah, for sure. Maybe stayed at the job a little too long because you just like working with the people you work with. It is such a powerful motivator if we actually like the people we're working with, we feel like they care about us, even if the leader is crap, the mission is awful, I'm not making any money, we're short-staffed, whatever else, we will tolerate a lot of stuff that we shouldn't tolerate because we like the people we're working with, and that actually makes a lot of sense. I'm not trying to talk you out of doing that. This is the second most powerful mitigator for burnout. The first is leaders who are supportive and listen, and the second is having a good support network. So would you say you have a supportive network of peers you feel like you can rely on for encouragement and collaboration at work? Yes? Both yes. Okay. So overwhelming majority for that one, so that's great. Okay, so this is the QR code. This one hopefully will actually work. This is going to take you to a Google Form. So if you open the camera app on your phone, it should pop up with a link to a Google Form. This is going to give you an opportunity to do a quick review of what we've talked about today. And then it's also going to give you some resources too that I'm going to send you next week. So this is, every page here is the same QR code. So if you're having trouble getting it, it's still the same code here. One of the resources you're going to get is a screening tool that I've developed to be able to say, like, am I at a place of burnout right now? Based on what I'm experiencing, it'll ask you questions about the mitigators, like do you feel like you have a supportive leader? Do you feel like you have a community around you? Ask you questions about the characteristics. Do you feel like you don't have any energy for work anymore? Do you feel depersonalized? Which I think is a little bit what you were talking about, feeling like I'm just a standard bearer instead of actually being a human being. You can ask you questions like that, so that you're going to get that over email. You're also going to get a digital copy of my book, which is focused primarily on healthcare, but certainly covers a lot of burnout topics in general as well. And then as you're finishing that up, before we do Q&A, this is I think one of the most important things I could say about burnout. That burnout happens to good people who want to do good work or put into impossible situations over and over. People who don't care about work don't burn out. People who care deeply are the people we want. The people we want to work with, people we want to work for, people who care deeply about their work. But that's actually a risk factor for you ending up in this place of burnout. Because you care, you're going to give extra, you're going to do a little bit more, you're going to think about it 95% of the time. You're going to feel like wherever I go, I need to be a representative of the industry that I'm a part of. You're going to take those calls, after hours. You're going to answer those emails on the weekends, all which I would say try not to do. But because you want to do a good job, you're going to do those things, and that tends to lead in that direction. Conversation, questions, comments, smart aleck remarks, total disagreements with everything I've said.
We talked earlier, and I guess I'm just trying to get some clarity for myself and maybe for some other people in the room. We just go to work and we grind, and because we've seen our parents do it, and I shared with you earlier, I watched my mom work for 40 years at Riecke Magnavox. You just get up and go to work, and regardless of how you feel, I don't care how you feel. I don't care if you're sick. I don't care if you're underpaid. You go to work. And so, how do you recognize that for yourself and say, no, this is not a good situation for you? At what point do you take that concern to your leader, or maybe you are that leader? And you're like, I'm tired of leading these folks. So what do you do? How do you handle that?
What we talked about earlier, it's so hard to recognize sometimes in yourself. That's part of the reason we say the screening, so that you can take that screening for yourself and try to get some assessment. For leaders who are plugging and chugging, for 40 years, just going and doing the thing, it can be really hard to acknowledge until something happens. One way is to have doctor administer 225 joules of shock to your chest. That can help you to say, okay, well, maybe I'm not exactly on the right path right now. I don't recommend it personally. Wouldn't do it recreationally for sure. Was effective for me, for sure, in a variety of ways. But yeah, one colleague right after I left Parkview called me, and she had just left Parkview as well. And she said, I realize now that I was burned out, a year and a half ago, and she had a crisis similar to what I had, even younger. She's younger than I am. I said even younger. I guess I should just say younger than I am at this point. but she had a medical crisis as an outcome of her stress too. Her response was to double down and work harder. And she's not alone in that. And I think that's common for any of us who've seen parents or grandparents retire and then not know what to do with their lives. It's because with many of us, we're still habituating this trend of we're identifying with our work, right? And so I think it's finding life that doesn't have anything to do with work, which we're not super great at. I guess as a room like this, people will get up early on a Friday morning and spend time. You're probably at higher risk than most because you're invested, you're engaged, and you care so deeply. It is the question. How do we recognize it before we're flat on our back or dead? I mean, some of the stroke stories, a couple of people are not alive anymore, and they would associate it with things they experienced at work. Comments, questions?
I'm sure it's a whole lot of presentation, but like, what were some of the steps you took personally to find out there?
Yeah, it is a whole other presentation, and actually you're gonna get a PDF over email if you did the review that'll kind of walk through some of that. The most important step for me, that was also the most difficult, was I had to start caring less. That's not the message that I had embraced for 25 years of work and service. But I had to say, things are gonna happen, I'm gonna do my job. How do I find the basics of my job, do my job description, duties, and maybe stay within that box? How do I go to a meeting where everybody's like, somebody needs some blah, 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 and not be like, oh sure, over here, let me help with that. Like, how do I put my hand back down and not volunteer? During the season, it's all seasonal, right? But during the season, how do I reel it back in? And then there's about 100 other things too, but that's the one that comes to mind first.
So I feel like, again, mass generalization, the newer generation, they talk about how they're not willing to go to jobs where people burn out.
Yeah.
And like, it's hard to find good employees who are engaged and gonna work hard.
Nobody wants to work anymore.
Right. But it also feels like a healthy, maybe overcorrection. You know, a tank slapper to, we've gone too far this direction. Like, it feels like a healthy thing in some ways. It also feels like a kind of a, oh crap, you know, getting people who are willing to put in the hours they need to get to the levels to, I don't know, do you see generational things or?
Yeah, for sure. You know, our son, for instance, who works as a public safety officer for Parkview. So public safety officers and chaplains are the only two, it's the only two departments that are involved in every single patient death. So like he was involved very soon, so he's going to work and he's literally moving people into the morgue, taking remains of babies, you know, from rooms and taking them over to the funeral home. I mean, so he's like involved in some of the similar things that I've been involved in, his mom and had worked with as well. He'd come home from work and I'd be like, how was it? It's like, it was fine. And he didn't talk about it, didn't think about it. You know, he as a 20, 21, 22-year-old, he could step away from work and not obsess about it once it stepped away in a way that I haven't so far been able to do. So I think there is a good correction. Now we do worry a little bit, you know, if I'm going into the hospital myself and I feel like, oh, it's a bunch of young people that don't actually care about their job. I worry a little bit. But you know, for them, I think their mental health, they're not going to put up with the stuff that we put up with, which I think is a positive overall. But yeah, that's a huge part of it.
Well, thank you all for coming today. We appreciate you. Thank you, Patrick, for your brief insight on burnout. It's a very important. One thing I learned was to remember, as leaders, we just need to listen. And that's a great reminder for all of us. We just need to listen, not only to ourselves, but to our people that we lead. A couple of dates, remember February 7th is our next speaker, John Dortch is going to be here. John with the Preston Group, Fort Wayne Spot, and Dream Center. He's going to talk a lot of stuff. So we're excited to see him on February 7th. And then also, June 14th will be our Lead Well event at the Do It Best Center at 11 Works. We love to see you at all of our events, but those are the two that are coming up soon. Thank you again for coming. As we always say, we hope you met someone new and learned something new. If you haven't met someone new yet, there's still time. Grab them, schedule a coffee meeting or a lunch. Thank you for coming. We hope to see you again soon.